Hi there, welcome back to my channel, the best place on the internet for Pathfinder lore and history. If you like this kind of content, be sure to like and subscribe, and if there's anything you'd like to know about in particular, let me know in the comments below, as I do read all of the comments. For this week's video, we're doing another fun departure from the Inner Sea and from Tianxia. We're going back to Casmaron. Now, obviously, the majority of Casmaron, at least close to the Inner Sea, is controlled by the Padishah Empire of Kalesh, but there is one little pocket that is separately governed, and that is, of course, the islands of Iblydos, which represent an independent culture in the kind of southwestern Casman region. Iblydos is actually pretty closely intertwined with the history of the Inner Sea region, as we shall see in this video. So although it's a little bit away from the Inner Sea, there's some close ties to some of the stuff I've already talked about in previous region deep dives. This video was really fun to put together. I leaned pretty closely on a first edition source book called Distant Shores that gives a real deep dive of the city of Aelyosos, which we'll cover in this video. I had a lot of fun with it. Hopefully you will too. Enjoy. Almost any ship traveling east from the markets of Katapesh, Jalmaray, or Kadira sails within view of Iblydos. Surrounded by the high mountains of the Casman coastline, and beyond those the immeasurably vast Padishah Empire of Kalesh, the city-states of the Iblydos archipelago remain a fiercely independent region in the southern Casmaron. To sailors on the Obari, they are a vital stopover, offering crucial protection against the dangers of the deep ocean, which include aquatic dragons, fierce storms, and determined pirates who will risk almost anything to seize the valuable cargo headed for far-off Vudra or up north to Avestan. For residents of the Inner Sea, there are few better and faster ways to reach Vudra or the southern Casmaron than on an eastbound merchant vessel. Katapeshi captains often hire extra mercenaries to guard against the Obari's threats before embarking on their journeys, and many of these guards enlist only until they reach Iblydos, known for its cyclopean seers who can predict the greatness of true heroes and bestow upon them powers beyond the understanding of ordinary mortals. Even for the majority who do not gain mythic power, the archipelago offers numerous opportunities, as the legendary birthplace of countless monsters, as a cosmopolitan stopover en route to even more distant destinations, and as potentially the first safe haven for those fleeing the Inner Sea. The history of Iblydos. The archipelago of Iblydos has one of the most ancient histories in all of Golarion. During the age of creation before the Great War with Rovagug, when gods still often came to the material universe in person, the monstrous goddess Lamashtu, the mother of nightmares, and a goddess I discuss in more detail in my first Infernal Gods video, came to Iblydos and spent some time in the enchanting archipelago, which was as beautiful in the primeval world as it is today. Her presence and divine influence is said to have given rise to many humanoid species with the likeness of beasts. Among these were the Medusa, the Harpy, and the Centaur, though perhaps none spread so quickly as the bull-headed Minotaur. The first of all Minotaurs became a mighty chieftain, and his name was Baphomet. After his death, Lamashtu famously turned him from post-mortal petitioner into handcrafted consort, and eventually Baphomet would attain a divinity of his own. Baphomet, the first Minotaur, is described in more detail in my Infernal Gods Part 2 video. In addition to the various populations of bestial humanoids, Iblydos is also the place of origin of various large predatory monstrous creatures as well, including the Hydra, the Chimera, and the Sphinx. Although there is a tenuous connection between the origins of both the monstrous humanoids and the magical beasts of Iblydos and the goddess Lamashtu, this connection may not be direct. Scholars theorize she did not have a direct hand in the creation of these creatures. Rather, their occurrence was simply the byproduct of the strength of her divine aura. Certainly, although many of these creatures are violent and dangerous, they are not necessarily innately evil, although it's true that the first humans of Iblydos certainly considered them as such. The Age of Creation was followed by the Age of Serpents. West of Iblydos, on the continent of Garand, the Serpent Empire rose to conquer much of the surface world. An alliance of three species, humans from a place called Aslant, elves from a kingdom called Severian, and Cyclops from an empire called Golgan, defeated the Serpent Folk. After their defeat, the Age of Serpents gave way to the Age of Legend. The power of Aslant grew, and the Cyclops Empire of Golgan spread eastwards across the continent of Garand. However, in the western heartland of the Cyclops Empire, the Golgan discovered the profane gods of the Serpent Folk in their abandoned ruins, and contact with these malignant powers corrupted the western Cyclops. Those Cyclops that had resisted the corruption of the west sailed further east. They established a new empire called the Golarion Empire in the islands of Iblydos. At the time of the Cyclops' arrival in Iblydos, indigenous humans had already clashed with the Minotaurs, Centaurs, and Harpies of the islands for generations, having established various warlike polities scattered across the islands. They viewed the settling Cyclops from the west as being no different from the other monstrous humanoids they shared their lands with, and the first interaction between the Golarion Cyclops and the humans led to bloody and violent clashes. Some of the Golarion Cyclops, tired from their exodus, were happy to crush human resistance and construct new cities in Iblydos anyway. Others, however, continued their exodus, crossing the plains of southern Casmaron to discover the Castrovan Sea. The fate of those Cyclops that ventured north won't be discussed here, but it is covered in more detail in my Northeast Avestan region deep dive video. Despite the warlike collision between the native Iblydosi human civilizations and the arriving Golarion exiles of the Golarion Empire, there were those among them who wished things different between their people and the humans. The Cyclops had kept a long record of their history, and they remembered well how the early Golarion had greatly benefited from their alliance with the humans of Aslant, and how it was only together that they were able to defeat the Serpent Folk. One Cyclops in particular, the renowned seer Ishkarandos, prophesied a mutual destruction for both the Golarion Cyclops and the humans of Iblydos, if they did not unite against an impending disaster. Though he did not realize it yet, the seer Ishkarandos was one of the few beings in all of Golarion whose magic had warned him against the coming Earthfall cataclysm. It was not, however, until the sky began to darken, when the descending starstone began to eclipse the sun, that the humans took the warnings of Ishkarandos seriously. They despaired, and finally turned to the Golarion Cyclops for aid. Ishkarandos took as many of the humans in as he could, using all the magic that he could muster to protect the ancient giant cities of their people from the tidal waves that surged across the Obari Ocean after impact. Though Ishkarandos himself died during the cataclysm, both civilizations would survive. And thanks to him, and the Cyclops in general, the humans of Iblydos better survived the Earthfall cataclysm than did most other civilizations across the world. In the Age of Darkness, the Cyclops continued to aid the humans in Ishkarandos' memory, opening their granaries, mines, and books in exchange for assistance in forging a new nation from the world's ashes. For many millennia, this partnership allowed both to thrive. The Age of Darkness gave way to the Age of Ashes, and the Age of Ashes gave way to the Age of Destiny. In the post-Earthfall era, something began happening to the Cyclops, just as it did in other parts of the world. The exact reason for this degradation remains unclear. However, as the Cyclops patrons of Iblydos dwindled in number, intellect, and prophetic power, many lashed out at the humans, only to be driven off the islands or into the hills. A small number retained their clarity, and those that did remained living among the humans, often moving into human-built cities and temples. As the Cyclopean leadership faded, so did the ties between the various Iblydosi city-states, which fragmented and warred with one another, forming ephemeral alliances and fragmenting again. While in other parts of Golarion the Age of Destiny was characterized by a resurgence of humanity, in Iblydos it was somewhat the reverse. The humans, allied with the Cyclops, had been at their strongest through the Age of Ashes, while the early years of the Age of Destiny, with the fall of the Cyclops, brought instead long periods of war and civil infighting. The other peoples of Iblydos, the Harpy, the Medusa, the Minotaur, and the Centaur, did have a resurgence, however. The weakening of humanity gave them the opportunity to once again claim vast sections of their islands, upon which they had dwelt since the dawn of time. Amid the turmoil, those Cyclops who had retained their power began prophesying once more, foretelling the arrival of great heroes, who would guide the proud islands for ages to come. Thus was born the practice of Cyclopean myth-speaking. Iblydos had always been an archipelago imbued with monstrous power and mythic potential, from the thanatotic magma of Mount Aelyosos to the formidable creatures of legendary strength that dwelt in its shadowed wilds. And just as the Cyclops had been crucial to the Iblydan survival during the Age of Darkness, they also came to serve as the gatekeepers of a new kind of mythic power, using their diminished prophetic abilities to foresee the means by which a hero might achieve a kind of specialized divine ascension. Over the millennia since this tradition began, hundreds of mortal paragons, warriors, artists, leaders, and explorers immortalized their names and brought prosperity to their people by becoming so-called hero gods, living conduits of divine power capable of mythic deeds and exploits. This practice of Cyclopean myth-speaking was a ritualized form of soothsaying that allowed a Cyclopean cabal to sense a mythic font, a short-lived phenomenon, a primordial creature, or other extraordinary task woven into the fate of a specific human that might enable the mortal to achieve semi-divine status. essentially a trial that, if completed, successfully would award the human with the power to liberate and protect various parts of the troubled islands of Iblydos. The Cyclopes often delivered these predictions through disjointed tales of deeds yet to come, hinting at the challenges ahead through riddles and metaphor. The rite was physically taxing and costly to perform, so only those who had demonstrated excellence and met the community's approval typically qualified for a myth-speaking. The subsequent rise of the hero gods brought some stability back to Iblydos, for although the city-state still clashed in politics, trade, and the occasional war, these conflicts were minor compared to the previous chaos. The tribes of Iblydos consolidated into 9 great historical city-states, each of which was ruled by one or more supremely powerful hero gods. Paizo was once considered the greatest of the 9 states. Its capital, Liacora, was among the first founded by the hero gods of the mid to late Age of Destiny, and it boasted 2 of the first hero gods to ascend through Cyclops mysticism. They were the sisters Diaphoria and Aelyosos. According to legend, while Diaphoria ruled from the city of Liacora, her sister ventured into the wilderness to clear the land for expansion, a land that was patrolled by the immortal Hydra Sagacis. After Aelyosos severed each of its head, she declared to her retainers that a new city would rise on that spot, as the Cyclops had foretold. When her followers protested at the lack of potable water at the site, Aelyosos proclaimed, "Then we shall slake our thirst with the blood of the Hydra," raising her hands and using her divine power to cause freshwater springs to arise where each head had fallen. Thus, it is said, was born the great port city of Aelyosos, second mighty city of Liacora. The rise of the hero gods naturally cemented human dominance in Iblydos for years to come, wresting power away from the island's other monstrous denizens. Finally, it is also likely that the power of the hero gods is what would ultimately prevent the rapidly expanding Padishah Empire of Kalesh, because of course by the dawn of the Age of Enthronement, which started at the year 1, the Padishah Empire had slowly but surely conquered all of the lands surrounding Iblydos, including the Iblydos' closest maritime neighbor, the Kingdom of Medea, and Iblydos' northern and eastern neighbors, the lands of Kadira and the Maraz Desert. Another significant event occurred at this time that had ushered in the Age of Enthronement. Aridin, once a mortal human, had raised the Starstone from the depths and created the Starstone Isles in the center of the Inner Sea. He founded the city of Absalom, on the coast of the largest of these islands, the Isle of Kortos. In so doing, he ascended to divinity and became a living god. Meanwhile, in Iblydos, the Minotaur, the Centaur, and the Harpy had been waging a losing war against humans led by living gods for several millennia already. Many wonder why the Minotaur warlord Voradni Voon of Iblydos would challenge a god and attempt an invasion of Absalom only 23 years after Aridin built the city. Those that do likely fail to take into account that for War Chief Voradni he had been fighting living gods for as long as he had been alive. He had even slain some of them. Absalom at the time had only a single living god, but in Iblydos there were dozens of these so-called hero gods, fonts of divine radiant energy housed in the body of a mortal. Voradni calculated that if he killed Aridin before more gods could appear in the Kortos Isles, then those islands could be a home for his people for generations. Voradni Voon assembled an army of staggering size and proportion. As described in my Absalom video series, tens of thousands of centaurs, minotaurs, and harpies assembled on the northeastern end of the Isle of Kortos. Unfortunately, Voradni Voon had not realized that there were orders of magnitude difference in power level between the hero gods of Iblydos, who were partly divine but still mostly mortal, and the fully ascended god Aridin. With a single devastating spell, Aridin shattered Voon's army and slew him outright. Although Voon's siege ended in defeat, the legacy of his invasion of Absalom remains, in the form of the large Minotaur, Harpy, and Centaur populations of central Kortos. Meanwhile, back in Iblydos, the power of humanity continued to grow, as for the next 4,000 years, the hero gods of Iblydos ensured the 9 great city-states had wealth, power, peace, and prosperity. Finally, and most recently, however, with the death of Aridin and the failure of prophecy, few nations were so terribly affected by this change as were the people of Iblydos. The Cyclops seers cried out in unison, heralding a primordial Leviathan that they proclaimed would mete out punishment for long-forgotten crimes until the guilty had repaid their debts. When the thalassic behemoth Uzmeraku swallowed the mighty navy of Liacora, no fewer than 10 of the archipelago's hero gods challenged the beast, but they lost their lives, and they failed to save Liacora, the Silver Arch capital city of the Western polity. Now Aelyosos has become the de facto capital city of the once great Western state. Since then, refugees have crowded Aelyosos, fleeing from the ruins of Leukora, which has been claimed by Sahagin and other dangerous creatures. Not content with the conquest of Leukora, the great behemoth Uzmaraku returns to Aelyosos every year, devouring the tribute the city's people throw into the sea to appease its wrath and buy another year of peace. This brings us to today. The hero gods who died in the great battle against the behemoth have sadly not been replaced. In the last 120 years, attempts at myth-speaking have failed with troubling regularity, and beyond the initial deaths heralded by Uzmaraku, more of the hero gods who once kept the land and kingdom safe have been slowly dying out. Fear has paralyzed their once glorious leaders, and some have abandoned Iblydos entirely. Those that do remain grow increasingly concerned that they are the last of a dying tradition, and perhaps the last hope of defeating the behemoth that still today threatens the Obari Ocean in its entirety. The city of Aelyosos and the rest of Iblydos. Although Iblydos comprises 9 major city-states, including Leukora, situated principally on the island of Lalisri, and capitaled in the city of Aelyosos, it is only the city of Aelyosos and the state of Leukora that is featured in any great detail in the Pathfinder sources. In fact, only 3 of the other 9 city-states are even named, and I have placed them on the map here more or less arbitrarily. The city-state of Timaeos is said to be renowned for its quarries, which yield fine marble, diamonds, jadeite, copper, and iron, and whose vineyards produce renowned vintages. The city-states of Timaeos and Leukora are considered allied states. Another noted city-state is called Silirica, and it is a militant and expansionist city-state, known by its own people as Silirica of the 7 Armies. Timaeos and Leukora are said to not look fondly on Silirica, and when their fierce warriors are safely out of earshot, they sometimes refer to their city-state as Silirica of the 6 Failures. Finally, there is the city-state of Hoimpia. The cities of Aelyosos and Hoimpia maintain a deep rivalry. While Aelyosos is the first port to welcome eastbound travelers, Hoimpia prides itself on doing the same for westbound merchants. Both are wealthy port cities and trade centers. Also worth mentioning, but not counted among the great city-states of Iblydos, is Diraxilis, the greatest city of Iblydos' beast-blooded population, which houses a large population of medusas, harpies, and minotaurs. Aelyosos is located on the northwest coast of Lalisri Island, nestled between a steep rocky slope to the north and a bare stone promontory to the southwest. The city is surrounded by lush gardens and parks that remain green year-round, with terraces supporting fruit trees but few buildings. The tides are dramatic and unpredictable, often flooding low-lying areas, turning the city's central hill and squat peninsula into temporary islands. The city's architecture is a mix of ornate marble structures, floating docks, and temples, and include eclectic collections of shrines dedicated to Aelyosos' resident hero gods from throughout the ages. At night, the coastline shimmers with bioluminescent plankton, creating an aquatic aurora, while the city's diverse neighborhoods, shaped by many recent construction efforts, accommodate a growing population of refugees. Despite these changes, dwelling places are often constructed to impressive scale, as it remains a point of pride for residents to maintain homes capable of hosting Cyclopean visitors. As the westernmost significant port in the island chain, Aelyosos is often the first introduction travelers have to Iblydan culture and hospitality. The city has been made beautiful through the relentless efforts of its citizens, the wealth generated by its trade, and its gardens, which are renowned throughout the Obari Ocean. Known as the City of Tides, Aelyosos is a great place for conducting business. Its harbor is narrow, but deep and well protected. The port is lined with warehouses that store goods from no fewer than 3 major continents. The city's residents are cosmopolitan and welcoming, their knowledge enriched by a constant flow of foreign ideas and a millennia-old tradition of Cyclopean education. Despite the sea's abundant gifts, the waters also pose a grave threat to everything the city stands for. Since the onset of the Age of Lost Omens, powerful tides have surged in from the north, flooding several neighborhoods that are now abandoned. These waves are heralded by an enormous thalassic behemoth that arrives annually, thrashing violently until it is appeased with offerings of gold, livestock, incense, and other valuables. The citizens dare not resist, having already failed once to protect the city-state's sister city from the monster a century ago. The ruins of that lost sister city are now occupied by Sahagin, who use them as a base for launching raids against Aelyosos' coast. However, the city is not without defenses. The merfolk, once known for their isolation, have recently emerged from the depths to occupy the continental shelf and the flooded areas of Aelyosos, aiding in the fight against the Sahagin. 2 surviving hero gods stand together in the city's defense, though they often clash over matters of policy and politics. The citizens also see it as their duty to stay physically prepared, knowing that they may one day need to take up arms against the ever-growing aquatic threat, and to deter neighboring rivals from seizing the city's wealth. Meanwhile, the city's leaders hold out hope that their Cyclopean allies will regain the gift of prophecy, guiding them to a decisive victory and lasting peace. The highest authorities in both Aelyosos and the broader state of Lycora are the two remaining hero gods, Chalciomedes and Somaira. They share responsibility for major decisions and are the overall rulers of the city-state, but they do defer to two chief advisors when it comes to certain specific matters. The first of these advisors is Chief Myth Speaker Phimater. Phimater was once one of the greatest seers in Iblydos, and her vision sent the hero goddess Somaira on her epic quest and earned her a mythic ascension. Myth Speaker Phimater is said to read from a sacred tome called the Prognostica, a half-written book in whose blank pages the Cyclops can read chapters yet unwritten. Unfortunately, the failure of prophecy has made both the book and Phimater herself much less effective in foretelling events, and thus Chalciomedes and Somaira are less and less confident in her advice. Their second chief advisor is the sea nymph Soeir, an aristocratic Oceanid. Advisor Soeir understands the temperament of the ocean better than all others, and she has the ear of the city's aquatic peoples as well. She is a key advisor on maritime affairs. Providing additional governance beneath the two hero gods and their chief advisors is the City Council. The council comprises religious, military, community, and trade guild leaders who meet regularly to discuss and legislate on important topics. Although the council's votes are non-binding until ratified by one of the hero gods, the two oligarchs typically respect the decision of the council. Several times a year, one or both hero gods hold public court to address cases and resolve grievances, leaving day-to-day governance to magistrates, notaries, and other public officials. The citizens accept the rule of the hero gods, seeing them as semi-divine figures supported by centuries of tradition. Although the majority of clerics in the city are in fact sworn to one of the two hero gods that rule them, theirs is not an exclusive state religion. In addition to clerics of various faiths, the legacy of the Cyclops prophets is felt keenly in the human population of Iblydos as well, and here there are many more spellcasters of the occult path of the Oracle than there are in other parts of the world. Points of interest in the city of Aelyosos include the School of Daskadai. This large campus meets most of the city's educational needs and attracts scholars from across Iblydos and beyond. Children receive state-funded education in language, mathematics, philosophy, and the sciences until age 14, after which they can choose to continue their studies for a modest fee. The higher university prides itself on its unparalleled instruction in ancient history and philosophy, and frequently funds expeditions to uncover lost cities and writings. Ephaeus Kyrnius, the professor of Cyclops reclamation, is particularly interested in the ruins near Pulse Illyrica, though she knows the area is dangerous. She and her staff regularly hire mercenaries with an appreciation for scholarship, or at least a respect for learning, to accompany her students and protect them from the savage hippogriffs, wyverns, and minotaurs that inhabit those hills. The Drowned Temple. This roofless temple, dedicated to Gosre, consists of 18 basalt pillars and a bowl-shaped font for offerings. It once extended modestly into the harbor, but now the tides flood it completely, except for a few minutes each day. Since the first floods 100 years ago, citizens have flocked to the temple to pray for relief from the weather. When those prayers went unanswered, distressed petitioners began vandalizing the structure, blaming Gosre for their troubles. Though feelings have since mellowed, a mild stigma still surrounds those who worship the wind and the waves. The high priest Halcmonis is working to restore the city, repairing both the damage caused by the tides and the tarnished reputation of his faith. Most donations here come from the residents of the Itzinche district, and Halcmonis eagerly redistributes these fine pearls and polished corals to help those most affected by the deadly waves and rainstorms. The Halls of Revelation. The largest building in the Seer Heights, this monumental temple commemorates the ancient Cyclops-human alliance, serves as an advanced academy, and houses the giant's cult of foresight and mysticism. Here the chief misspeaker Phimater recites aloud from the Prognostica, but the failure of prophecy has made this place but a shadow of what it once was. Over a dozen Cyclops have gouged out their own eyes in despair, but some among them claim that their blindness has enabled them to see the future once more, a future marked by catastrophes and betrayal. Led by the charismatic Impholistes, this new group, calling itself the Keepers of the Mystery of Fallen Fate, has clashed with more traditionalist seers. When not taken seriously, these blind disciples will descend to the streets of the city to proclaim their grim predictions to any who will listen. The Cleoseum. Irori's popularity in Aelyosos largely stems from the Iblydan tradition of excellence and personal apotheosis, and the Kleosium Stadium is one of the 2 large buildings dedicated to his worship. Here, disciples train their bodies to perform extraordinary feats of athleticism and strength, focusing less on the manipulation of internal energies common in Vudrani mysticism. For millennia they went unchallenged, but in 4696 a quintet of Kyrgyz's faithful arrived, declaring it their duty to surpass Irori's devotees, and establish their own school within sight of their competitors. Last year the 2 schools announced a public decathlon to determine who was superior, but were dismayed when the statuesque Esokate, associated with neither school, emerged victorious. The champion Esokate has remained in the Kleosium ever since, claiming to bear a message for the city's greatest warrior. To the frustration of the hero goddess Sumaira, the delegation of Udays she sent to treat with the champion were rebuffed, with Esokate claiming her message was not intended for the goddess. The new columns. While most of Aelyosos' hero gods chose to build their shrines atop Pantheon Hill, when Thonis of the 30 Columns ascended in 134, he insisted that the marketplace would be his temple. A century of tidal floods has rendered the old market nearly unusable, so as part of his renovation program, Chalciomedes honored the lost hero god by setting aside space for his new bazaar in Southgate. Like its predecessor, 30 pillars surround the space, each depicting one of the exports Thonis championed to make Aelyosos prosperous. Nearby, however, the shallows provide ample cover for dozens of Fwath and Hanover gremlins who delight in stealing and causing trouble for shoppers. Desperate to restore order, the municipal guards have issued a bounty on gremlins, though the eager hunters racing through the markets have caused nearly as much disruption as the gremlins have themselves. The Odeon Triumphant. Constructed after Poliakora's victory over the 4th Silurican invasion, this steep-sided amphitheatre rises from the rocky southern slope of Pantheon Hill. It can comfortably seat up to 4,000 spectators for regular poetic, dramatic, and musical performances, and the city's hero gods occasionally use it to make public proclamations. The procession and stage are elevated high enough to remain above water, and the encroaching tides are a benefit rather than a hindrance, allowing curious merfolk to access the theatre as well. Several years ago, during a 3-day series of plays that honored the city's founder, Eliake, the stone seats reverberated with the sound of draconic screeching, and the baritone actor suddenly began speaking with a woman's voice. Performers have sporadically spoken in tongues on the stage ever since, leading some to wonder whether Odeon is haunted or if there is some deeper mystery at play. The Shrine to the Founders. Space on Pantheon Hill is limited, and as new hero gods rise and seek places to build their shrines, the city sometimes decommissions and respectfully dismantles those of long-dead champions. The Shrine to the Founders serves as both a museum and a temple, allowing citizens to pray to the vestiges of past heroes, who can no longer grant spells. Or at least that was the case until 3 years ago, when an astral deva materialized before visitors and claimed to be the purified soul of Zodikaire, one of the hero gods who died fighting the behemoth Uzmiraku. After delivering a dire prophecy, whose meaning scholars are still debating, he departed, promising that when he next appeared, the calamity he foretold would soon follow. The Shuttle and Sen. With its entrance safely on dry land, this weathered tavern perches over part of the flood market, and has catered to fishers, oysterers, and dock workers for decades. The aging owner, Belonipe, represents the 4th generation of family ownership, and has listened sympathetically to her clientele's woes, as the glut of fish the merfolk trade has driven prices down and proud families out of business. These disgruntled workers have formed the Sandpipers Union, which meets in this tavern to discuss the smuggling they must resort to and their growing resentment of the city's aquatic inhabitants. Desperation is beginning to make the Union dangerous, and it may not be long before they take up arms against the merfolk and any terrestrial sympathizers. The Ytsinche District. Earthfall's impact lashed Iblydos with tsunamis and shattered its western coasts, even causing an ancient Cyclopean town to slide into the ocean. When the merfolk ascended from the depths, they adopted this coral-encrusted site just outside Aelyosos harbor as their home. Although they are sociable for their kind, the merfolk remain aloof, and often view their human allies' claims with suspicion. One particularly outspoken figure is Dua Ilox, who has spent the past 5 years petitioning and later demanding a formal myth-speaking, so that his people might have a true champion to lead them against the Sahagin. Attempts to explain to the merfolk that this ability has only ever worked on humans, and that it's becoming increasingly difficult to perform, have fallen on deaf ears, and he is rallying an ever larger gang of aquatic troublemakers to harass Aelyosos until his claim is acknowledged. The Hero Gods of Aelyosos. The 2 hero gods that rule over Aelyosos are Chalciomedes and Sumaira. These were both ordinary mortal humans who once embarked on a mythic quest to achieve the promised power offered through the rituals of a Cyclopean myth speaker. Now they are mythic humans, possessing a spark of divinity, and able to grant divine magic to clerics and inquisitors who are sworn to them. Calxiomedes is also known as the Green Warden. He is the hero god of gardens, orchards, and terraces. He was born in a small village of vintners and subsistence farmers nestled in the hills of Pathfinder, where he learned the art of horticulture from his parents and the language of the vines from his grandfather. As he grew, he developed labor-saving devices for tilling, irrigating, and fertilizing the soil, which quickly earned him a glowing reputation throughout the city-state. When he came of age, he was given the honor of transporting his family's wine to the capital for the annual tasting competition. When their cask won top honors, the council unanimously decided that he should receive the Cyclops' blessing. The giants prophesied that a future tragedy would bring him both immortality and humility. Calxiomedes was perplexed, for most myth-speaking told of fearless monster slayers and arcane prodigies, while his fate seemed mundane and sorrowful. Fate struck when returning home to find his village burned and his family slain by Silurican raiders. The forces of Ptolemaeus captured the 17 perpetrators and brought them back to the devastated village. There Calxiomedes forgave them, declaring that new life would always follow misfortune, and they too would have the chance to redeem themselves. As he spoke, a tree sprouted from the ruins and bore a single fruit infused with mythic power. Calxiomedes is driven by a desire to restore hope and life when all seems lost, a motivation that led him to emigrate to Aelyosos following Leocora's destruction. He encourages others to cultivate beauty, reap the harvest, and share its fruits to inspire others to do the same. Although he is opposed to violent retribution, ruling a city with a vengeful co-ruler sometimes forces him to act against his principles. His priests are often farmers, gardeners, and druids, who work diligently during planting and harvest seasons, but travel widely during the rest of the year to teach and mediate disputes. Like all hero god faiths, his is a young one, focused more on doing the most good in the time Calxiomedes has left, rather than establishing a rigid dogma. Somaira, on the other hand, began her career as a guard in Leocora, quickly rising through the ranks to become the youngest captain in the city's history. 2 years later, the giants of Seer Heights summoned her to reveal her destined ascension. Despite the prophecy she heard from them, Somaira did not seek to hasten her fate, choosing instead to focus on her civic duties, and enduring public criticism that she was not living up to her potential. Her dedication was put to the test when Osmaraku attacked Leocora. Somaira rallied the city's defenses and led the charge against the monstrous threat. Survivors of the battle reported a blinding flash of light as Somaira's spear struck the behemoth, after which the creature scattered her forces and retreated into the sea. With the city in ruins, Somaira was presumed dead. However, 10 years later she resurfaced in Aelyosos, where she convened a closed meeting with the city's leaders and emerged as one of its 2 new hero gods. Somaira remains tight-lipped about the events surrounding her defense of Leocora and her subsequent disappearance, insisting that the city must focus on duty and regular military training to prepare for its final confrontation with Osmaraku. She takes her own advice to heart, especially after the death of her rival, Spalkis, the hero god of skirmishers from Silurica, which has solidified her position as the prominent demigod of warfare in Iblydos. Her holidays coincide with the changing seasons, marking the start and end of military campaigns. While she occasionally disagrees with Calxiomedes on priorities, even he knows not to challenge her when the harvests are finished and the laborers are idle. Despite her commitment to Aelyosos and its defense, Somaira disappears from the city for a week each year, and none, not even her fellow hero god Calxiomedes, knows where she goes in her absences. Somaira's clergy tends to be physically strong, knowledgeable in battlefield tactics, and skilled with spear and shield. Many serve actively in the city's military and emphasize cooperation and unity in all local efforts. Like their patron hero goddess, priests of Somaira prioritize the safety of Aelyosos and the city-state of Poliakora, but never to the point of being hateful or xenophobic.